We all know that the sport of football is one of those sports that would take a toll on your body, which is why we see a lot of football players turn into professional wrestling, such as Happy Corbin, Brian Pillman, Roman Reigns, and Goldberg, to name a few. Today's story is about the only wrestler to have a successful wrestling career while still playing football in the AFL, the Big Cat, Ernie Ladd. I'm Emilio Salamander from WBP TV, and this is Beyond Kayfabe. Without further ado, let's cue that intro.
I'm a visionary, revolutionary. I'm a visionary, revolutionary.
Ernest Lawrence Ladd was born November 28, 1938 in Rayville, Louisiana. He was raised by his mother and stepfather. His family would move to Orange, Texas, where he would play basketball and football and become an instant star. Ernie would attend Raleigh High School, and here he would grow to become 6'9", 290 pounds. Ernie was coached by the legendary Willie Ray Smith Sr. As much as Ernie was a force on the football field, he was the same on the basketball court. So much that his basketball skills single-handedly earned him a scholarship to Grambling State University in 1957. With Ernie being so tall and big, he would walk on the football field and dominate. He had quickly established himself as the star of the football team as he played defensive tackle. He was so big and strong that he had no problems overpowering everyone that he faced. He owned the football field. In 1961, Ernie would enter the AFL and the NFL drafts. He would be drafted 119th by the San Diego Chargers with the AFL and 48th by the Chicago Bears by the NFL. Ernie would decide to play for the AFL instead of the NFL. In an instance, he became one of the league's elite players, and he was one of the biggest and strongest men in pro football during this era. In 1961, Ernie would make his professional wrestling debut. He did it as a stunt at first, but let me tell you, Ernie was a freak of nature, standing at 6'9", 290 pounds, a chest size being 52 inches with 20-inch biceps. Man, and he was also trained by the legend Bobo Brazil. During the off seasons of the AFL, he would wrestle part-time. Now fans love seeing him in the ring. So with this, he became a huge draw. Ernie and the San Diego Chargers, they would win the AFL championship in 1963. Ernie, he will appear in 4 AFL championship games, winning one of them. He is also a 4-time All-AFL selection. Ernie was a beast on the field and the same in the square circle. But Ernie was a man. He was a man that had standards. He was not going to put up with any nonsense. With this being said, he would fight against the Jim Crow laws in New Orleans during the 1965 All-Star Game. Ernie Ladd had helped organize a walkout when the city black football players were met with a lot of racism. Ernie, he had a successful career with the Chargers, but he didn't get along with the front office. The GM and coach, Sid Gilman, suspended Ernie indefinitely in 1965. But hearing this news, Ernie, he will refuse to return to San Diego and announced that he will devote his entire time to pro wrestling. Ernie will eventually sign with Houston and play with them during the 1966 season. He will also sign with the Kansas City Chiefs that following year. After this, he would retire from football and wrestle full-time at the age of 28. Ernie will explain why he stepped away from the game of football. He will say, "After a few years, I was making so much money wrestling in the off-season that I figured I could make a lot more by giving up football and wrestling full-time. I quit football at 28 and still had several good years left. That first year of wrestling, I made $98,000. And after that, I never made less than $100,000 a year. That was big money back in the 60s. From the years of 1961 to 1969, Ernie, he enjoyed his time as a babyface. But during the 70s, Ernie, he wanted to kick it up a notch. He would change his character from a loving babyface to a heel. He would instantly become one of wrestling's most hated heels across all promotions. Ernie was the first black wrestler to properly portray a heel. He would be known to get the crowd worked up with his arrogant and colorful demeanor during his promos, especially when he would give his opponent nicknames. Now, to get real heat from the crowd, Ernie, he would simply take a count on loss and would just plainly walk out the arena. This act would be called pulling the Ernie Ladd. He wrestled for the NWA territories, Mid-South, NWF, WWC, and the WWF, which is now known as the WWE. In the WWF, Ernie, he was managed by the Grand Wizard of Wrestling. One of his most memorable feuds is with Andre the Giant. He would call Andre names during his promos. One thing people may not know is that Ernie, he was actually the 5th person to body slam Andre the Giant in 1978. That was 9 years before Hulk Hogan, who is currently being known as the first man to body slam Andre the Giant. In certain arenas where he wrestled, he would be known as the King. He would wear a crown to fit that moniker. But the name that would stick to him the most throughout his whole career was the Big Cat. In 1976, Ernie would pick up a huge win against Earl Mr. Universe Maynard, earning a WWF Championship match on March 1st, 1976 at Madison Square Garden against Bruno Sammartino. During the early 80s, Ernie, he would leave the WWF and started wrestling for Mid-South Wrestling for Booker Bill Watts. Ernie would have a good run in the tag division alongside Bad Leroy Brown. He also served as the manager of the Wild Simones. In 1986, he would try his hand at commentary. He made his commentary debut calling the 20-man Battle Royal at WrestleMania 2. Ernie, he would quietly leave the WWF. Ernie, he was inducted into the WCW Hall of Fame in 1994 and the WWF Hall of Fame that following year, making him the first wrestler to be inducted in both WCW and the WWF Hall of Fames. Now it's time to get personal. On June 30th, 1962, Ernie, he would marry Rosalind Marie Holmes, with who he would have 4 children with, and they was married for 45 years before his death. And a fun fact, Ernie, he is a close friend of the Bush family, and he has supported his 2000 campaign. He also coached his kids' basketball team in Franklin, Louisiana, and before Hurricane Katrina, he had also had his own restaurants in New Orleans called Big Cat Ernie Ladd Third Down Barbecue. Ernie, he was diagnosed with colon cancer in 2004, and he was given 6 months to live by doctors. Because Ernie was mentally and physically strong, he was able to fight past the doctor's deadline, and he would live for 3 more years. Ernie Ladd was sadly passed on March 10th, 2007 at the age of 68. Now Ernie, he should be remembered for his athleticism. For him to go to college for basketball and just walk on the football field and dominate the way he did, and then just move on to professional wrestling and become a great star in that as well, it just shows you how much of a freak of nature Ernie was.
I started with nothing and came out a king. I've been the one that's been ballin' for rings. It's been me and my team and we chasing the green. My team be the shit, we ain't ballin' for free. My team be the shit, we ain't ballin' for free.